So why don't we start? I guess so you work mostly with neuroplasticity. So
Mhm.
maybe you can just talk about a little bit like what you do with neuroplasticity and how can understanding neuroplasticity help everyone.
Yeah. Well, I found it originally trying to help myself to figure out, why was I struggling so much? But pretty much as soon as I had done that, I realized this is for everyone because what I was learning was about how the brain creates our experience by how we perceive the world through our senses, because our senses is, you know, that's how we get all of our information. And if the
Right.
brain
Mhm.
isn't interpreting that information accurately, then we don't have accurate information to base all of our everyday interactions off of.
And what does neuroplasticity have to do with that?
It can change
Oh.
because how your brain interprets your senses can
Mhm.
change. And you can do that. There are specific neuroplastic approaches like handle or neuro movement. But there are also just by changing how you do things, like mind shifting, I would say is an excellent neuroplastic approach. And changing your environment to make yourself comfortable. Just learning is neuroplasticity. So anytime you learn, your brain is changing.
And so just maybe explain to the people who are listening who may not know that or watching. How does your brain change when you learn something? What changes?
There are neurons that grow and create new connections in the
Hmm.
brain. And experience is what does that. And specifically, how you perceive your interactions with your environment.
Hmm.
So if you're in math class and you have a terrible experience in math class because it's hard and you don't get help, you're learning. And you're not learning just about math, you're learning math is hard. But then later, if you go maybe the next school year and you have a really good math teacher, then you're learning I can be successful in math and you're learning the math. And so that's an example of how that happens. But people maybe who have sensory issues, like if you eat a bite of food and it tastes awful and it feels horrible in your mouth,
Hmm.
the more you do that, the more your brain goes, oh, I know how to perceive really gross food textures. And so you're going to need less and less gross food to perceive it as gross. And
Right.
you're going to end up with a really narrow range of foods that are tolerable. But if you stick with what's comfortable, then your brain goes, oh, this is how to detect comfortable food textures.
Hmm.
And you broaden what you can eat.
And you're putting resources to teach people how to change their own brains to be more
Mm-hmm.
effective,
Yes.
on on your paid part of Substack, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you're also posting information free for everybody, but
Mm-hmm.
you're putting specific things on for the paid. So maybe you could describe one or two of the things, first of all, that are free on the free part of the
Mm-hmm.
Substack. So let's start there. So if somebody say subscribes to your Substack feed, without becoming a paid subscriber, what do they get? What are you teaching them?
I'm giving a lot of general information about how the brain works and some neuroplastic principles, like about the importance of comfort. I have some free things about mind shifting, about how to navigate sensory overload,
Hmm.
um, and about my experience too, so that people can maybe relate to something.
Uh-huh.
And then,
Yeah.
well,
Y- Go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Sorry. No, I was
I
going
was
to
just
say.
gonna
So
say,
your experience, so those are some of the things, and then you have like a resource library that you're putting up on,
mhm,
on the other side of Substack, right?
I do, and that's gonna have more specific information about the nitty gritty of how to go about this brain change thing.
Hmm.
Um, Especially for teachers and individuals who want to help themselves.
And what did that mean for you? Were you before you started your journey on neuroplasticity? Were you like a lack of self confidence, a lack of efficacy, and then what was the journey to where you are today, where you feel confident enough to be able to basically start your own business?
Well, I had what I now know is cortical visual impairment, and I wasn't noticing that I was having trouble seeing. But in retrospect, I can see I was. What I was noticing was that I was tired all the time, and I just, I got so tired so quickly, I really couldn't live my life.
Mhm.
And
Mm. Wow.
now, yeah, now that I understand how important comfort is and I'm able to make my environment comfortable and I know what I need, I can do just about anything I want to do. And I learned about this just as I started to teach. And so what I did when I taught was I learned how to observe just the everyday behaviors of my students, how they held a pencil, what their interests were, how they sat in a chair, things like that. And it told me how their brains worked and what they needed. And I was able to
Mhm.
use that information to tell me how to teach them. And then they made, it was not uncommon for them to make 2 years of progress per school year.
Really?
Yeah. And so I thought, I don't want to leave this planet without passing this information on to other teachers so that more than just me is doing this. And
Mhm.
I've seen it happen. I've seen it work over and over. I know it works. So
It's really amazing that we don't teach this as in the normal course of events, right?
yeah, I know. I think part of that is because people just kind of take how their senses work for granted because
Uh-huh.
it does work so often.
And then, so you were talking a few minutes ago about how you found that by observing your students and how they took in information and how they processed it, you were able to take students who may have been behind initially and bring them through 2 years worth of learning in 1 year.
Yeah.
So, uh, can you give us a couple techniques that teachers could use or that you use that made that happen?
Well, I think the first thing is to kind of look at the things that you already observe and look at it from a different standpoint. So you might be noticing things like you might leave something out for a student to use and they might not use it. And you might think, well, they just weren't being careful. Instead of thinking maybe they weren't being careful, think they didn't see it and wonder what is it about this environment that made it so that that student didn't see it. And change it, simplify the environment, tell your student this is where it's going to be. Or same thing with hearing. If you're giving instructions and they aren't hearing it, and instead of thinking, well, they're just not trying, or they need to learn the skill of listening, think about the environment. What is it that's making it hard for them to understand your instructions?
Mhm.
Is there background noise, or is there too much information given at once? And see if you can change something about how you deliver those instructions so that they can receive that information.
So the way you prepare them to perceive things can have
Mm-hmm.
a huge difference effect on how they actually what they notice and how they
Yeah.
process. It's funny as
Yes.
you're saying that because as you're talking, I'm picturing this video from well many years back, but the instructions are as you're watching the video, count the number of times that people pass the ball back and forth.
Oh,
And
interesting.
so as you're watching this video, you're watching the ball go from one person to another person. Sometimes they bounce it off the floor, sometimes they pass it up high, and you're just counting. And then they ask you how many times you saw, and some people say 13, 15, whatever the number is. And then after around a 5 or 10 second discussion, then the moderator says, "Did you notice the bear on the bicycle?"
Yes.
And
Yeah.
nobody noticed the bear on the bicycle. And they said, "Well, we're going to play the exact same video all over again." And sure enough, there's a big bear going right through the middle of the video on a one-wheel bicycle pedaling. And you just never, while you were so focused on what they told you to focus on, you never saw that. But as soon as you were kind of primed to look at it, it's like, how could I ever miss that? And, to a certain extent, what you're saying, it kind of goes with that, right?
Exactly, exactly. And, for kids, for neurodivergent people, a classroom is like a giant bear on a bicycle. How do
Right.
I pick out the pertinent information? I don't know what the pertinent information is. And so if you're a teacher, another thing you can do is to ask yourself, what do what is it that my students need to get that they're not getting? And
Mhm.
how can you change the structure of how you're delivering instruction or the classroom to make that piece really obvious, to make it stand out from the background.
I think, and as you're saying, just another thing that pops into my mind is that they say that when you're in a room and the light waves that are coming into your eyes from all the different things in your environment, that's about 11 megabytes per second
Hmm.
of information coming in. Your brain processes about 20 bytes per second.
Yeah.
And so 99.99% of the light waves that are hitting your eyes that could conceivably be processed with your brain, you're just not paying it. Your brain couldn't handle them anyhow. So somehow or other, your brain comes up with some decision on which ones to focus on, and that's what it focuses on, and all
Mhm.
this other information. So if you can prime the person to be concentrating on the things that will most help them. And that's not just with eyesight, it's with
Yeah.
hearing, it's with interacting with another person. And then they can be trained to do that through the exercises that you have in your resources. It
Hmm.
seems to me you can have a real profound effect on kids, but adults as well, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And for adults, especially adults who, they're neurotypical, everything's worked well for them in their lives, but we're all aging. And the more you understand about your brain, the more you can keep it healthy and stay sharp
Right.
your whole life. I
Well,
mean,
we're all aging until we stop aging, right?
yeah, there you go. My grandfather was a president of a university, and he actually twice he was president of universities in the Pacific Northwest, and he had PhD, very, very, very bright, very intellectual. But toward the end of his life, he experienced cognitive decline,
Hmm.
uh, and he lived to 101. And in his later 90s, by around 100, he couldn't really put sentences together anymore. And we would go visit him, and he'd like be holding a pen in his hand, and he knew he needed to put it away, but he would forget why he was holding this pen in his hand after a few
Hmm.
seconds. And so my mom and I have been training in a neuro movement approach, and so we thought, well, let's try with him. We don't know everything yet, but let's see what we can do. And so she did some lessons with him, and he went from that at 100, He went from that to being able to carry on a conversation again for,
Hmm.
about, he lived another about 4 months, about half the time he was able to carry on conversations with us.
Wow.
So, you can change your whole life.
Yeah. That's amazing. Now, we met because I teach mind shifting, and one of the things is that the course is available for all educators in either the state of Washington or the state of New York to take free. Um, and you're in the state of Washington,
Hmm.
and you were taking the class. What do you see as a parallel or a link or similarities or even differences between mind shifting and the things you're doing with neuroplasticity?
There's a I've noticed a lot of them, but I think the most important is that it seems to me that it can help to regulate the nervous system.
Hmm.
And when your nervous system is dysregulated, like if you're in fight or flight a lot, if it gets triggered very easily, um, that can create negative neuroplasticity, which can lead to things like reduced um, range of motion, stiffness, less cognitive function, word finding difficulties. And if you're doing mind shifting, which seems to me to be very much focused on taking you out of fight or flight so you can become rational again, that's a
Hmm.
huge piece of the puzzle to being able to have healthy brain function your whole life.
Yeah.
And that in itself, as you do it repeatedly, is neuroplastic. My teacher, Anat Banyal, who taught the neuromovement method, said it only takes doing something twice to learn it.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Huh. I don't know. My dad said 3 times, so one of them's wrong.
Yeah, I know. So if you take yourself out of fight or flight twice,
Yeah.
that's your brain is already learning how to take you out of fight or flight more easily.
Yeah, I mean, so like in as you're saying that, in the course, what I tried to do is there's certainly the times where people are learning the material, but I tried to build into the session times where people could go into small groups, and
Mm-hmm.
that was a way of kind of practicing with a small group. But then also between sessions, instructions on, okay, take one or two of these techniques and try them out, and then report back on them.
Mm-hmm.
And that in itself was a way of people doing it. And then at the beginning of the next class was a few people then reporting back, I tried this and here's how it worked, or I tried this and here's how it didn't work. So we could explore that. So I tried to build
Yeah.
things like that into the course.
Yeah. And I think that's a great way to do it because you have to learn through feeling.
Right.
Because if you don't
Yep.
feel it in your own body, you can't really understand it. And when I did it, I found it really helpful when you gave specific examples of thoughts that you might think when
Right.
you're
Okay.
going into fight or flight. Because I had always just associated fight or flight with more extreme things,
Hmm.
like if I fall down.
Yeah.
But
Uh-huh.
um, but when you were talking about like blaming or saying like, "Oh, this is stupid," or "I don't like this," I thought, "Oh, that's it too." And so then
Yes.
when I
Hmm.
was going through my daily life and I was getting frustrated because I couldn't see, I realized, "Oh, I'm going into fight or flight. I can stop this." And that was really that alone has given me so much more energy because I'm not pushing through frustration because I can't see stuff anymore.
And I think one of the purposes is that if people can realize that they're in fight, flight, or freeze, or they're
Mhm.
just acting from habit, or they're just copying what other people are doing, that then gives them, oh my gosh, I'm in mimicking mode, or I'm in fight or flight mode. And then they have a choice. Do I want to continue with this? Is this being helpful? Do I want to change it? Am I capable of changing it? And if I'm not capable of changing it, do I need like a different distraction or a time to do something else in order to relax my brain so that I can pick something else to do?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And I as you're saying that a different distraction, I think I've been working on my distractions, see if I can because
Mhm.
sometimes you just can't change it.
Right,
Well, it
right.
is the way it is. And you just have to wait it out. But I'm also curious because you've commented several times you've learned a lot about neuroplasticity by reading my Substack, and I'm wondering, is there anything in particular that you found that really relates to mind shifting that you've learned from my work?
So yes, because um, our brains fall into patterns as whether it's you do something twice or you do something three times, but whatever it is, your brain falls into a pattern of doing something that may be helpful or may not be helpful. And when you're in your neuroplasticity, it's calling your attention to what's going on, and your sense of observation, and then you always seem to have a couple things to do to try. So if it's not being helpful, um, if it's causing you distraction, or if it's causing you to be angry or anxious, um, a few things to try to give yourself resourcefulness. And that's so similar to what I'm trying to do with
Mm-hmm.
mind shifting. Also, is well, it's the same thing. We're both trying to um, give people more resources so that they're better able to tap into their own superpowers, which they all have.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And that's one thing I think that's what the resource library is all about is
Hmm.
it's focused much more on these are things that you can do.
Hmm.
The free part is more general information. So I really hope because I just feel it's a mission to get this stuff out there. I don't see very many other people working on this kind of topic to give people tools to use in their everyday lives to
Right. No,
make
it's
them
I
function
see
better.
I see people who actually, so many of whom have become very popular with platitudes like, "Oh, all you have to do is relax," or something like that. Um, but I don't see people who are grounded in very specific things that people can do, and that's, I think, one of the things that attracted me to the work that you're doing is you
Mm-hmm.
do have all those very specific things, and that's what I've tried to do in either the courses, or the first book is out, or the second book, which I'm working on about conflict and collaboration, to give people practical things so that, well, let's say the case of conflict and collaboration, so that you realize that you're going into a situation and you might have in the past avoided that situation because you
Mhm.
didn't want a conflict, but now you feel more comfortable that you can actually accomplish something without the type of conflict that tears people apart.
Exactly. Exactly. And what's something that people could do if they're, especially like if they're going into a situation where, say it's, you know, mom who you've had a
Mhm.
tense relationship with growing up. And so you've got all of these expectations going into that, and there's going to be conflict. Maybe there's going to be other people with the family. What's something that people can do to help kind of ground
Well,
themselves?
so there's grounding yourself, and there's also grounding the other person. So the second book is going to be more on grounding the other, trying to
Huh?
things that you could say that hopefully help the other person ground. And so where you were going is my mind was kind of ahead and thinking of things you could do, and you brought up the example of, you have this mom that may have been overbearing, and you had conflict with her, and now you know that there's something that she should be doing, and you just know that by bringing it up, it's just going to cause another fight. Okay,
Yeah.
and so but what one of the things that's been shown is if you can start off with a conversation by some type of a strength-based comment, something that acknowledges her strengths, the things that she does well. What that does is it puts her into a state of well-being. it Her brain starts releasing oxytocin, and the oxytocin then triggers other parts of the brain to form happy memories and access the resourceful parts of the prefrontal cortex. And so when you say, mom, I just want to say, like, you have always had our best interests at heart, and one of the things I've always loved about you is you always put us first. And what I'm thinking is that, what I really think that at this point, it's important for us to do some things for you, like whatever it is that you want to tell her. Okay.
Hmm.
But that,
Hmm.
if you were to say, like, mom, I think, we need to put somebody in here, um, to help you out for a couple hours a day, that's going to be triggering. But if you can say things that establish the connection and have her brain releasing the oxytocin, um, you have a much better chance of being able to work collaboratively to accomplish something. And
Yeah.
that's like one example, but it's a 230-page book, so
Right.
there's
Yeah.
a lot. Yeah, there's a lot of examples in there.
That's very interesting because one of the things I did when I was teaching, um, I taught elementary special ed for 10 years. It, it's a very emotional thing when you're working with parents whose children have disabilities, and I would always start my conversations with parents with something that they did well with their child or something their child did well at school.
Hmm.
Um, and there's one student in particular who had a lot of behavioral issues, and I needed to communicate with her about them. And I knew she was not going to take that information well from me. So I had her child. It was just a routine. Every day, her child would give her, this is how I did in school, good or bad.
Hmm.
So her child was the one delivering the information about, I, threw toilet paper all around the bathroom today.
Hmm.
And then I would come in and say, and this is how we solved it. And here's something good that happened. And I would come in with a strategy to use.
Hmm.
And that, even though I had to deliver a lot of negative information, we had a really strong relationship.
Wow. Yep. Yep.
And it
And
even
yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
helped strengthen her relationship with her child
I
because
would
that
imagine,
trust was
right?
developed.
Because she didn't have those resources initially, and one of your big gifts to her was by modeling them. You gave her the tools that she could use with her child.
Yeah. I hadn't thought about that, but yeah. And she really, I think that was why things were tense with us in the beginning because she didn't know really what to do and
Hmm.
she was overwhelmed with life.
And then I
And then,
see a comment. It's hard for me to see the comments and talk, but I see a comment. I was, which is really great comment. I always look at it as predicting the other person, as protecting the other person's dignity.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
and I would just say it is protecting the other person's dignity and it's also because that's what I was taught too, is like, never say something where the person has no out because they're going to fight.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
In addition to protecting the other person's dignity, the positive effect is it's causing the release of some combination of, dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, or endorphins, which are uh, creating a feeling of wellness and opening up the prefrontal cortex and the hypothalamus, to be able to make memories and to
Mhm.
learn and to achieve.
'Cause you remember more what you feel than what you
Yes.
hear.
Yep. Yep.
I had that in mind a lot talking to parents.
Mhm.
Like, they're gonna remember how they feel with me more than they remember what I say, so let's make this a good experience for them.
Mhm.
And that just transformed the relationship entirely.
So that's kind of going back to the mind shifting. There is the five powers of your resourceful mind, and empathy is one of them, where you steel yourself and say, something, I'm not going to try to accomplish anything. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just connect with this other person and find out what's going on with them. And so you
Mhm.
then channeled your empathy power, to give them these wonderful feelings. And then once there, then you could work with them on some other things. But number one was getting that empathy, sage to sage, brain to brain connection.
Yeah. There were some parents where either I knew that they'd had a negative experience in school themselves or
Hmm.
that they'd had negative experiences with their child in school
Hmm.
prior to coming to me. And it wasn't until November that I told them anything negative about their child,
Ah,
because I was just building a relationship with them.
kind of making deposits in the emotional cookie jar, right?
Hmm. Yeah, I
Or
was
the emotional
waiting, and
bank.
exactly. And the thing I was waiting for was to see them relaxed enough to joke with me.
Oh,
And if
yeah.
they were joking with me and having fun, then I thought, okay, next time I can tell them about this thing that happened
Mhm.
with their child that wasn't so great at school.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So I'm
Yeah.
just looking at the time, and we said this would be
Mhm.
about a half an hour, so we have theoretically 1 minute left, although, but so just I'm thinking, what's something that you would want people to take out of this half an hour, if they watch the recording, or for the people who are here now?
Oh, I would say that their brain can change, and if and what that means is that you can change and your life can change and it can get easier. So don't if you're struggling with something, don't give up. Keep looking. What you're doing now may or may not be the thing that works, but keep trying.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think, really right along those lines, it's like, if you don't like the story that you're living, just write a different story,
Yeah.
because it's all in your head.
Hmm.
Bruno, well, thank you for joining us. I just see that you joined, and unfortunately, maybe you could put a question in, so we can end with a question from you. But we were just about ready to ready to close. So, um, yeah, obviously, you have a Substack. How would
Hmm.
you like people to reach out to you?
Well, as of today, I'm going to turn on the chat on Substack so they
Okay,
can contact me on the chat. I also have a contact me page on my website, neelylc.com, neelylc.com. So those are both ways that they can get in touch with me. Oh, the chat is
fantastic.
for paid subscribers, or they can
Mhm.
leave a comment.
Yep. Okay.
On
Good.
anyone can leave comments on my articles.
Good. And then for me, I am on Substack, but I also have a website, mindshiftingwithmitch.com, and a newsletter, which is attached to the website, but also mindshiftingwithmitch.blog. So there's contact me pages there also, so people can get in contact with me and see my writings. So,
Perfect.
well, Elizabeth, thank you. This was
Yes,
this is a lot of fun.
this was
Well,
fun,
we'll
and I
we'll,
just
we'll, we'll do it again.
yeah, and I just noticed we color coordinated.
And we color. Yes, yes. Happy orange. Aren't you glad we did that, right?
Yes, I am.
Okay. All right.
Okay,
Talk to you
I'll
soon.
see you
Okay.
later.
Bye.
Bye.